Welcome to the Learning Can't Wait podcast, a Full Mind production. At Full Mind, our vision is to ensure every child has access to an exceptional education. Each episode, we will be joined by pathfinders within and around the education space who are bringing about transformational change on behalf of deserving students. I am your host, Hayley Spira-Bauer. Welcome back, everybody, to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. I am so excited to introduce you to our next guest. We have Dr. Christina Dukes Brown, the Chief Executive Officer of the Boys and Girls Club of Patterson and Passaic. Welcome, Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Hayley. Thank you for having us on.
I should clarify, do you prefer Dr. Dukes Brown or Dr. Brown?
Brown is fine.
All right, wonderful. We're kicking it off. We're doing some clarity, but we're gonna jump in with some big important topics today. I'm very eager for you to share about yourself and your journey to this role and the work you're doing today, and also why you have committed your life to this path. It's always interesting for me to hear how other equity warriors are really, how they got to where they are and why they have continued on it. So let's just jump right in.
Sure.
Dr. Brown, how did you come to be the personal and professional version of yourself?
It's funny because both of them are very much so aligned. I grew up in a large family. So I'm the youngest of six. The closest sibling to my age is 10 years older than me. And one of my siblings, my brother, was misdiagnosed as a child. And as a result, he had just a really difficult time in school. My parents, who, moved to New Jersey with very little and built this whole family and made sure that we were all taken care of very well, but they didn't have all the tools that they needed to understand what we might need educationally. And as a result, my brother's life was very rough. And watching that as the youngest growing up and watching my parents sort of suffer through that with my brother, it was really difficult. And I knew that something was wrong, like something was definitely wrong. There were so many educators working with him and with them that no one figured out that he was bipolar schizophrenic in all of his years. And so I wanted to go into advocacy work as a teenager, and I really wanted to work with people of color because what I found in my neighborhood growing up was that we were more than likely struggling in schools without getting the attention and the support that we needed. And so my parents had a little bit more means by the time I came along. And so they sent me to this private school where I was of the few Black children in my classes. And I knew that my experience in school was vastly different than the kids in my neighborhood and my siblings. And so when I got to college and I became a member of a sorority and I started volunteering at a local elementary school. And it was there that I figured out that that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to work specifically with children to assist in helping parents to diagnose what might be happening for their children academically, but also to be like an inspiration and motivation for other people. I tell my students all the time, I'm not special. I just worked hard in school and there's nothing that I did that you cannot do. And sometimes having that presence in front of you daily is the difference between making decisions to work hard and to get out of the environments that are not exactly helpful to our growth and development and doing exactly the opposite. So that's really how I became who I am personally. I take my work very seriously. I understand the needs that schools are supposed to provide to families and children. And I've worked my entire career to make sure that any place where I was working, any school where I was working, that we did the most to make sure that every kid had what they needed to be successful personally and professionally. So I'm really proud of the path that has been laid for me and for so many educators before me who taught me so much. And so it's out of respect for them and all that they poured into me that I continue to do the hard work each day.
I need to take a pause and just leave space for that story. It's an important story, and I appreciate your vulnerability there.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, you worked in schools for a very long time. How did your journey as a sibling to a child with mental health needs impact how you showed up in the classroom for children who may also have mental health needs? Did that influence how you taught, how you built community, how you structured your classroom?
Yes, absolutely. So it's funny because as a student, especially in more privileged school communities, and my family was not privileged, but the kids that I went to school with, some had means, great means. And there sometimes is a meanness that as young people we exhibit toward one another when we're different. And I just never had that bone. I could only imagine the things that some of my classmates went through as a result of being bullied and picked on, and I just couldn't be a party to that. As a matter of fact, I probably got in trouble for defending them and saying, if you would say that to them, then say it to me. Bad girl.
That says so much about you, though. Like my family, we talk a lot about being an upstander, not a bystander. That's exactly what you
Yes.
were.
Yeah. So that sort of, I didn't like that. And um, as a teacher, what I understood was that when children weren't learning as quickly as I wanted them to learn a concept, that had nothing to do with that child. That had everything to do with me. And I needed to alter how I taught and how I led in order to make sure I was meeting that kid's needs. So a lot of times my principals would put those kids, those kids in my classroom. I was close with all of our special education teachers because I wanted to know, like, there's a reason that this child isn't reading on grade level. What am I doing? How do I alter that? What does the IEP actually mean? And how do we provide accommodations and modifications every day that ensures that we're changing our approach to teaching so that that child has the benefit of learning? And I tend to do that a lot. I annoy a lot of educators. You should know that. Because I'm constantly, especially as a leader of a charter school, it's easy to collect data for your general ed population and say, wow, we're making progress, we're doing well, and everyone wants to give each other an attaboy. And I'm like, yeah, so how are our L learners? How are our special education learners? What's happening
Let's
with them?
disaggregate that a bit, please. Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
talk a bit more. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but what happens is because I am eagle eye focused on those things, I end up partnering with the right people as principals and other leaders who also are looking for those things. And as a result, we've had amazing success in the schools where I've worked, especially my last assignment. It's really important to me that we remember that children are not, to just be seen and not heard, or unseen and not heard. That's just not true. These are little people, little, growing adults. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we meet their academic needs, just like we meet their social emotional needs, just like we meet their, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like those basic needs that we are supposed to meet as human beings to survive. That's a part of our school community, that we know that it's important that they have healthy food, that it's important that they have a place to share their thoughts and share their goals and their dreams and to be encouraged. And so that's pretty much, that's what I've dedicated my life to doing. And I'm really happy that I did. It brings me joy every day.
I'm hearing you speak, and I sometimes like to connect what I hear from speakers that are so profound as yourself with other speakers I've had on the podcast before. And I had an episode in season 4 with Ben Markovitz and Jarrell Bryan, Ben founded Collegiate Academy in New Orleans, and then ultimately went on to found All Means All. It's a foundation with a very similar mindset. And Jarrell is the current CEO and principal of the schools in Louisiana, New Orleans. 15 years, and they actually try to intake higher populations of students with disabilities, multilingual learners, because other schools love to disaggregate populations that are most vulnerable in order, as you said, to show their efficacy and impact. But in reality, that's not the general population. So
Mhm.
I think y'all would get along very well. I'm happy to make an introduction after this podcast, just because
I would love that.
I feel
I would
like you would.
absolutely love that.
Yeah, no, and Jarrell and I email every once in a while as he listens to episodes, and he's always just such a light in this difficult work, right? And,
Yeah,
some of what I think makes it hard, and I don't know if you agree with this, is not the kids, right? It's the system that makes it hard. The system isn't
definitely.
set up to support all learners.
I mean, it's funny. I'm glad you said that way, but I don't think that enough educators of color recognize that we live in a capitalist society that depends on a lower class, a middle class, and an upper class. So, of course, all of our systems are designed to do just that, make sure that we have those three levels. And as you know, the gap widens between the middle class and the upper class. It's just like our schools tend to do the same. Like we are okay with accepting mediocrity in some environments and or assuming what children can't do. And it's just important that we recognize that the systems that we are fighting against, it's really important that we expose them and that we recognize the talent in front of us and that we work toward that and not toward the system. I'm not interested in creating three different classes of people. I'm interested in creating efficacious young people who will go out and vote my child's interests, and that is what I do.
Yes. Like, yes, full stop. That was, yes. This, yeah. Ooh, okay. Sorry. I'm like overwhelmed because I feel you put into words what I often talk about way more eloquently than I ever have. And it was just, you said it very beautifully. And I agree wholeheartedly.
Thank you.
I feel the system is broken. It's intended to be broken, and just trying to fix it and put band-aids where we have like some elements of visible brokenness is not the way and not what our
Yeah,
children deserve. So
not at all. And it's funny, I visited New Orleans right after the storm. I was there for, I think it was the ASCD or like the National Charter Schools Conference. And one of the things that they did was that they took us all around the city. And so we were able to see some schools and see the degradation of the people who survived that storm. And I always wondered what was going to happen for the children. How were they going to recover academically? And what were they going to do to make sure that the time that those children were either displaced or out of school, I wondered what they would do. And it's so interesting because then COVID happened.
yeah,
And I'm like, this is what they were going through, and
yes,
just trying to figure it out. Like, how
yes,
do we make sure that our children are not, falling so far behind that we can't catch them up? And then how do we keep them motivated to do the work? And the news is sharing all this stuff about death tolls. And I'm like, my kids are suffering. We ended up having
yes.
to have fireside chats and give kids opportunity to just express themselves. And then we had civil unrest and we had to talk about that. And I admired the educators in New Orleans because I living through just the pandemic, I never in my life thought that would ever happen, you
Mm,
know? Um, and I know exactly what they were facing in so many ways. Like so
yeah.
many of our students who were losing grandparents and distant family members and siblings and parents, that was when I really understood. I was so glad that I had experience in understanding how character education and efficacy education are really important to building not only the grit, but the resilience and the tenacity in children. Because I'm not sure that I would have been able to have the tools to understand that there was a problem, right? And then the network to go out and get the resources that the children in the school needed. So New
Yes.
Orleans taught me a lot. I learned a lot from how they handled that, and I applied a lot of that learning in during the pandemic.
So two things. One, I just went to New Orleans this weekend for a family wedding. So it's ironic that we're back on this topic. But two, my first year of teaching was 2006, and the students had been displaced to Houston. And I did Teach for America. So Teach for America, the teachers that were teaching in Houston that year had a ton of displaced students who had experienced a ton of trauma, as you just named, and had manifestation of their trauma in their behavior. And many teachers in their first year were not equipped to handle that level of trauma. I mean, and then we talk today about, and then sorry, one more fact. The next year was this year schools reopened under all charters. And one of my best friends from college began teaching in New Orleans that year. And so and then kids had just come back and there was a ton of trauma. That, I think, naming that what you just said about New Orleans being like a critical moment in your education career, I think that's when I first started learning about manifestation of disability, manifestation of trauma, which has now become like a really important topic to me because most of our teachers are not equipped and not taught to and prepared to handle and support students in a loving, affirming, and having high expectations manner for students that have experienced trauma. So you just really it really solidified that for me in my brain in this conversation. I feel like I'm learning so much from you, and I'm sure our guests are too, but you're helping put a couple pieces together for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. A part of my dissertation was, talking about what universities could do differently to prepare not only teachers, but principals for
let's talk about this. Yeah. So what were your findings, Dr. Brown?
So my research essentially showed me that most teacher and principal training programs in New York City, of those people that I interviewed, that they did not have strong enough practices in place that taught either group the impact of turnaround practices and how to utilize those practices with fidelity such that the school actually comes from lower performing to higher performing. And that sort of looks like, so how do we use data effectively, really? Like what is a lexile? What is a quantile? How do we understand that information and how do we respond to that? When we look at a high stakes test, we're not just looking at proficiency rates. We're looking at instructional reports, and we're looking at the breakdown of data to understand how to move child A, not a group of 8th graders, if that makes sense. And so while they touch on those things in these teacher preparation programs and principal preparation programs, the deep learning that has to happen, or the deep learning that they have to experience through doing, it often doesn't happen until they're actually working in the job, right? And so now I'm a principal and I'm coming in for the first time and I'm trying to figure out how to understand what the data is saying to me, and then how to respond to it with an intervention that will really support a child, and not, again, just the group, but each individual child. And if that's not something that we began to sort of really put into many of these programs, and I'm sure that there are some, but of the groups that I interviewed, they had not had that. So it was interesting to hear that, because you would think that would be something that we would be doing differently. But a part of my recommendations to the university that I went to was, even in my own program, that wasn't present. And so here's something we can do right now, and bringing in a data maven to come in and talk to teachers and come in and talk to principals about how to do that. And the other thing is that, you can be as well-intentioned as you'd like to be, and you can have the right attitude and the right spirit, but without the tools, you're hitting a wall. And then teachers and principals burn out because they really don't know what to do, and they care so deeply, but they're not sure, they're not equipped. And then they leave the profession. And if you know that after the pandemic, teachers were leaving in droves, like they were out of there. And it was sad because it wasn't, again, I just don't fault teachers for the challenges that we have, but I do fault that our systems are not adequately preparing them for the challenges that they're going to face, as you said, academically and social emotionally. And trauma-informed practices are super important right now. And, even that, I'm not seeing that coming up in courses and universities across the country. So hopefully that will change.
Thank you for sharing that dissertation. my own teaching education was in New York City. So I'm even more curious. We could talk about that offline if you interviewed anyone that I got educated by. But I am really curious because now, Dr. Brown, you are, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're focused on out of school time. So
That's correct.
at the Boys and Girls Club, which I know is a really familiar name. And I would say that most people don't fully understand or know the depth and scope of the work that Boys and Girls Club does. So, do you mind telling us what is the focus of the Boys and Girls Club, that organization and the portion of the country that you oversee? And
Sure.
how does that connect to what's happening in schools?
So out of school time is really important, especially in challenging communities. Giving children time away from school where they can not only explore who they are, but also have, some fun and be provided with the academic tools that they need and to be around other people who care deeply for children. To prevent them from getting involved in some of the things that may occur in their neighborhoods. And so that's essentially what we're doing in the towns of Patterson and Passaic. So we offer academic support through tutoring. We have a homework help program called Power Hour. The BGCA, Boys and Girls Club of America, has very specific character education tools and programs that we use. And so we provide that. And then there's the fun. We want kids playing basketball. So we have an amazing partnership with an organization called Street to Street that handles all of our basketball programming. We have an amazing swim team. They're really good too. They're like fish in water. They are very impressive every time you see them. And then we have other things like dance, and we have a gaming club, and we're about to get into esports under the direction of our new chief operating officer, who is very passionate about athletics, but it's particularly esports because that's such a hot topic for young people right now. So that's really what we're doing. We're trying to make sure that children get the academic supports that they need, that they have an outlet to sort of showcase their talents, whether it's athletics or arts, and that we have lots of time spent with them talking about what we call the three essential questions at the clubhouse, which is who am I, where am I going, and what does it take to get there? So.
I mean, that is just such a wide breadth of attention to so many aspects of a student's life, both outside of school. Can you talk to me a little bit about what types of initiatives and projects you're focused on upcoming that get you really amped to be doing this work?
Yes. So we found in our clubhouses, so we have 2 clubhouses and we have 11 other satellite sites. So there's 13 of us all together in those 2 towns. And as we're working with young people, what we're finding is that a lot of girls want to open their own businesses. And so they want to become these huge entrepreneurs, and they are so focused on that. They've understood that my job is to go to college and to, acquire a skill set, work in that field for a while, and then make it my own, right? And which I think is amazing. And so we just launched our program called Girls with Goals. It's a 10-week program, sort of begins with a kickoff and a retreat where the girls are exploring those questions about who they are, where their lives will take them, and all the things that they'll need to do to actually get to the dreams that they have for themselves. And a lot of the work will be around figuring out what my business really is, what's the benefit to the community that I'll serve. Is it financially lucrative? Is it a social organization that provides a service to the community? And then they work with a business coach who will help them create formal business plans and presentations that at the end of the program, they'll present to many of our funders and board members to figure out who has the strongest plan that will be most likely funded, and where the supports are needed to accentuate the plans that our other teams are preparing. So we're really excited about it. The girls are excited. We intended to service 60 girls. We ended up getting 75. So the excitement from the young people is even greater than we anticipated. And I know from the girls that I saw there on Tuesday night, there is a wealth of talent in that group. And I will not be surprised if all of them actually follow through with their business plans even after the program ends. So, yeah.
That is so ambitious. I think about that. I hear that. I'm like, wow, I would have loved to have a program where I could be creating things and building things and learning about business. My own education about business happened on the job after leaving schools. And now I work, in a business and I'm learning every day. So that's an incredible opportunity to build up that skill set and that knowledge base for these they're girls. I'll say girls, young women,
Yes.
girls, for their futures. We need more women leaders. We know the impact that women in leadership has. I'm an HBR nerd, Harvard Business Review nerd. I'm always reading studies about the power of women in power. I love it.
Yes, yes. And it's so great because we've had so many women reach out to us from across all industries, from real estate to marketing to those who are jewelry business owners. One of the young women, her jewelry is placed in like Bloomingdale's in Manhattan. So they're all coming to mentor these girls throughout the 10-week program and let them know, it's great to be a business owner. It's great to be a leader in the work, but you should know that these challenges exist as women in leadership, and here are the ways that you combat them, and just prepare yourself for these things and press on and fight on anyway. So we're really excited about the partnerships we've developed, and if you're ever available, feel free to come on, drop by.
I was just going to say that sounds like a great time. I'd love to be part of that and see what you're cooking up, and always happy to help if there's an opportunity to help. That's
absolutely
cool. That's
Thank
very,
you.
very cool. Dr. Brown, we're already nearing the end of our conversation, which is wild. This flew. I feel like we just started talking, and I can have 50 more conversations with you. First of all, thank you for coming on. But before we get to our wrap up, I'd love to ask you my standard last question. You have insight in and around schools with really unique kind of pathways to that. So curious what advice you would give a teacher starting their career today.
I would say do not believe the hype. The work is more difficult when you are fighting against it. Human beings are human beings. We all require love. We all require dignity. We all require respect. What you pour into children is what they give you back. And children do not learn from people they do not like. So if I'm you, I'm coming into the classroom and I am being my authentic self, and I'm willing to embrace different types of personalities and dispositions. And then I'm going to do everything I can to learn every trick I can learn to make sure that every kid in front of me gets what they need from me. And understand that that requires research, and it requires looking at other teachers and learning from other teachers. It requires going on Teachers Pay Teachers and all those different websites to get the strategies and the tools that you need to be successful. And remember that data is just that, information. It is not an indictment of who you are as a human being. It doesn't tell anyone how much you care. It just provides you a roadmap to how to fix whatever is going poorly for a child academically. And I advise that you take it as that, just information that helps you meet the needs of learners in your classroom. So that's my best advice. And I wish someone had told me that.
It's some wonderful.
My first year teaching was, oh my God.
I think back to that first year. Oof, I mean,
tough year.
we do the best we can with the information we have. And part of why I think your advocacy early in this conversation for improved teaching programs for burgeoning teachers is so important, is because if we can better equip teachers to be effective in the classroom from day one, everybody wins.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for your time today.
Dr. Brown, thank you so much for sharing your brilliance with everybody that's listening here today. This has been a true pleasure having you on the podcast.
Same here. Very lovely meeting you.
And thank you to everybody who tuned in. Thanks for listening to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and share this episode. Be the first to know when we have a new episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have a suggestion for an episode, email us at podcast@fullmindlearning.com.